If we talk about like downtown Manhattan after 9/11, we talk about New Orleans after Katrina, we talk about even a more slow decay like deindustrialization in Detroit and Cleveland and the effort to sort of bring those places back. There are definitely hopeful examples in the past.
모스트 보던 팟캐스트.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's episode. Before we start, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the immense loss and heartache caused by the recent wildfires in Los Angeles. Here at Mopo, we just want to express our condolences to all those affected, of which there are many. But I think today we want to approach this, well, what is really a tragedy with a greater sense of purpose. I know it might feel very soon, but I think there are a lot of things that we should understand about the fires and how it will affect essentially the built environment in the future, which is really our mission now here on the show. So I think we want to address the situation, not just in political terms, but really in terms of how we might consider developing for the future, understanding the increased risk of building in a more complex and seemingly hazardous world, just so that we can make better places that are also safer, more affordable. And I think there are a lot of questions right now in the air, but it's a good moment to probably discuss what we can take away from the situation right now. So with that, thanks Minkoo for joining me. I know it's a pretty heavy topic, but I think there's a lot that we can mine out of it.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, a tragedy. And we send our condolences from the East Coast as well. Really, the size and the scale of the impact was just unseen. And when I heard the news that the impacted size was larger than Manhattan alone, that was an immediate impact, and like it burned to my head. It burned on my head, in my head. So I can't imagine what the actual, is victims the right word? The actual people who get affected by this fire would feel. But it is definitely a tragedy, and we can only learn from that to prevent the future ones. So I think there's a lot of work to do on the building code, the zoning code, and from the city planning, from rethinking the building materials and so on and so forth. So we shouldn't just stop here.
Yeah, I mean, let's just start right there. The reason why I think this is so impactful is just the scale of loss. I mean, Los Angeles is a big city, and this is a portion of Los Angeles. Obviously, a lot of LA is still safe, although it's quite precarious right now. But we're talking about 40,000 acres across all of LA County and beyond. And 40,000 acres, like you said, is similar in size to Manhattan. It's similar in size to the city of San Francisco. Like, it's a substantial amount of land that has been basically raised. And, there's a lot of buildings, not as many as in a denser place, like in the cities I just listed, but a lot of places have been affected. And I think anybody who's turned on the news or flipped on social media and seen the sort of before and after effects, it just looks like devastation, on the scale of which we see in wars and in conflict, but not so much, here in America. I mean, especially I think in a large city like LA, a significant city, and not to downplay the consequences of things that have happened in Maui and in Katrina and New Orleans and whatnot. But Los Angeles is one of the two large American cities, and to have it like happen right there seems quite significant.
Yeah, the last time I checked the numbers in terms of the built structures, there were only about 20% that was contained, and 80% was just gone. So the beloved coffee shops and the homes and the places that you bought grocery, they're just all gone. So there isn't anymore a sense of place or community.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're looking at 12,000 plus structures, 12,000 and counting. And I think what you're saying too is like, of course, it's an erasure of the physical environment, but what can't be rebuilt right away is that sense of community. And I think that's probably on a psychological level, one of the most daunting aspects of this, which is you've had something in place for a long time. People have grown up there, they've lived their lives there, and yet how can we bring that back? I think it's really hard. And so I think that's a different question from what we're going to address right now, but it is something that needs to be considered when you run the numbers and we start to think, okay, how do we actually make a rebuild possible? Because I mean, we've seen this around the world. You can build something really quickly, but to create that sense of place it doesn't happen nearly as fast.
Right. And I don't know if you want to approach this the fast and easy way, because, I mean, for one, like you said, the community won't be the same as before, because if you were impacted by the fire, would you even think about going back? Like, it is a traumatic experience, and building from that will need some time, and also people, giving enough time for people to recover from that, and then try to build something, you know, um, to also memorize, also not forget about that incident, but try to build something that can be more, and also be, it can resist the these type of catastrophes to happen again. So yeah, I'm losing my words.
No, I mean, it's tough. And look, maybe to get a little bit analytical, one of the challenges that's the the areas that are affected are facing is that they're largely residential. And whenever you have a monoculture, meaning a single program in those places, once that program gets wiped out, it's very hard to return. I mean, we're seeing
Yeah,
this in downtowns, cities that are largely built on office. Once you go work from home, what's the reason to go back in the office? And obviously, it's a very different situation. But I do think the problem is a bit analogous in the sense that if you have nothing else to do in these places except live, why would you go back to live in a place that is fire prone, that has this sort of tragic memory? There isn't something else that's pulling people back there. And I think that's maybe a
exactly.
little bit concerning as well. So, one thing it has going for it, Los Angeles is still a beautiful place to live. If you have land in Malibu, it's just pristine. It's really great once everything gets cleared up. But I mean, you're not going there to go to school. You're not going there to work. You're going there to live. And if there's a better spot for you somewhere else on this planet, you would probably consider going there first.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for individuals to decide. And I think it's an interesting sort of psychological question that is going to affect a large community.
Yeah. So how do you think the city would view this? Like, would they? And these are, as I'm assuming, most of them are private property. Like, they've been single family homes. Would Is there even room for the city to come in and recover, or like try to rezone or replan that place?
Well, just a few numbers. We're looking at 135 to 150 billion dollars of property loss right now. And what's crazy is that we're also looking at a rebuild cost upwards of 250 billion. So there's actually quite a big
Oh
delta
my.
between what the things are worth and appraised for at the moment and what it would cost to replace them. I would also expect that property value to go down in the future because of all the baggage associated with these places. But look, I mean, I think what's also quite daunting is LA is facing a lot of different issues right now, and it's not like any other city. I mean, we have housing affordability. Let's start off with is top and sort of front and center all the time, and you just wiped out a bunch of housing units. Granted, they weren't ultra dense. They're largely owned by people of means, which doesn't, I think, limit the impact of this. I mean, it would be another case if this were really dense, sort of lower income communities. We would have a different reaction, but I think the psychological effect would be the same.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I really don't know, and I think it's a moment where we again probably have to think like, what do we want our communities to look like in the future? A lot of these places were built in the 50s and 60s at a certain time when that type of like suburban sprawl was kind of in vogue.
Mm-hmm.
Building technology wasn't where it is today. And I think we have different values now. So regardless what the city wants to do or what private actors want to do, I think there will be a change in attitude. And I don't think it would be a situation, or I don't think it should be a situation where we should just sort of do what happened before.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, from a real estate perspective, what would you say?
I mean, look at the buildings that's gone now. They're, I presume, mostly wood frame stick buildings that, like you said, was the initial construction method because of its cheap, affordable materials and the fast processing and the fast ability to build it. But it was always astonishing to me that even now, where there are better materials that are better for fire resistance, better for every other reasons, are still available, but the practice is business as usual, just taking the same cheapest method because it's the easiest way to build. I you know I, I can't really agree with that. And case in point, to the building that was one of the surviving buildings that got a lot of media attention, which was designed to the Passive House standards. right? Like that building it was actually built in 2022 from my research, or 2024. So it's a very new building with very new material, and the ambition or the understanding of, better understanding of building materials and its design method. And that case in point kind of prevented the building getting burned down while the neighboring buildings were all gone. Um, and we can talk about, the benefits of that, but I don't know why people are not building like that more.
Yeah, I mean, look, you touched on an interesting point, which is I think architecture, and I'm talking about construction when I say
Mm-hmm.
architecture. A lot of it is fashion. A lot of it is sort of like what your neighbor does, and I think it's quite difficult on a human level to differentiate yourself between sort of I want my building to look a certain way. And by the way, we're talking about people who can actually hire an architect and design their own building,
Right.
design their own home, which is almost everybody else cannot do. We're talking about certain people who have a choice in what type of
Mm-hmm.
home they live in. Um, so on one hand, I think a lot of it is affected in these types of places by, what exists and what fits in. Maybe there's a design guidelines, sort of design hierarchy aspect to this as well. But a lot of it too is based on local building culture and what people do. And,
Right.
when you're building something like a house, the most important number is how much it's going to cost. And so,
Mm-hmm.
the difference between, let's just say, for instance, $1 million and a $2 million house, quite a lot. I mean, it's 100% increase. You might get you'll get the same roof over your head. You'll get 4 walls and a roof, but the quality will be different. And I don't think you really expect the quality to. It's hard to predict what the quality is going to do for you until
Mm-hmm.
an event like this happens. So
Right.
I think that this hopefully will. I mean, my prediction would be that this will start to affect things at a policy level. Um, Simultaneously, it will also affect things at a economics level. On a policy level, we've already seen Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, say that he's going to suspend CEQA for the reconstruction. CEQA being the California Environmental Quality Act, which is quite, I guess, infamous for having the intention of making sure that we build sustainably and make sure that we are aware of how we're affecting the environment that we're building in. But a lot of the consequences have been a policy that really stymies development, that
Mm.
reduces the ability for someone to actually predictably develop something, and basically has led to a lot of people would say the housing shortage, sort of indirectly, that we face in California.
So is that another layer of the energy efficiency related policies? Like I've heard that also California has that building energy efficiency standards
Yeah.
that requires building, and there's a target to be fully electric by 2045, I believe, and with 100% reusable energy. Like
Yeah.
what are the details? Does that entail?
Well, California in general is just a more onerous place to build. It's also a more difficult place to be an architect because of this. I'm licensed in California. In addition to the national accreditation and licensing tests, I had to take a specific California related one. People
Mm-hmm.
think that that means like earthquakes and stuff. There's maybe 2 out of 50 questions about earthquakes. A lot of it is about the legislation that California has created for itself around things like, yes, environmental quality, energy efficiency, a lot of permitting. You see a lot of sort of intensity and overlap of these different types of legislations, especially around coastal areas. So there's the I forget the exact name, but there's the Coastal Commission, California Coastal Commission, which oversees a lot of beachfront
Mm-hmm.
areas, a lot of sort of the islands and the coastline, of which California wants to preserve, of course. You also have to deal with water, both saltwater and freshwater. So there's just a lot of stuff, basically. There's a lot of things that we have to consider. And I think the intention, again, is right. Like, we want to make sure that California is a nice, beautiful place. But if it's also extremely unaffordable and impossible to change and adapt to the new sort of social world hierarchy that we live in, is it worth it? And I think that's what a lot of people are questioning, especially when you spend so much of your income to pay taxes here. So yeah, to answer your question, they're different. CEQA is different, and CEQA has been in the crosshairs of a lot of different sort of people, but they just add, it's just another layer of tape that you have to cut through.
Right. So in line with that, do you think this will cause another adding another layer of zoning overlay, like for the wildfire areas, if they don't exist already?
Well, that's where I'm going to connect it to the economic argument, which is I don't think that that's a pressure that's going to be placed on by the government. I think that's going to be a pressure that's placed on by insurance companies and building companies, basically saying, look, if you want to build in these places, you need to build with a certain type of material that is fire resistant, or at least more fire prone than just stick frame construction. I also think that those companies are going to place a little bit of pressure on, just naturally through the so-called market, we're going to see situations where places like the Palisades, if it gets reconstructed, are going to have to rethink their zoning and rethink how they build and the sort of density and the proximity. There was another consequence of sort of the sprawl, making it really hard to get people in and out of the emergency zone. So I do think this will happen, but I think it'll be more of an economic argument, at least led from the insurance side rather than from policy, sort of dictating things.
Yeah, speaking of insurance, I've read so many scandalous articles about the insurance companies like canceling their property insurance, knowing that there's a huge fire going on. And maybe because it's because they were the insurance premiums were capped for a very long time, or weren't increasing to the speed that it needed.
Yeah, I think this is something that's been going around the internet quite a lot. People were talking about how over the past year, the areas that were affected by the fires had a lot of insurance policies straight up canceled. And, I think that comes off quite poorly for insurance. I mean, insurance is having a bad couple weeks in general, health insurance and whatnot, which I think just speaks to the unaffordability of things. But the insurance companies will tell you, and, I think there's quite a lot of truth to this, that they had no choice because there are also regulations in California that prevent people from increasing insurance too drastically, insurance premiums. And so I think, again, the intention is good. You don't want predatory insurance companies basically just jacking up the price for the average consumer. Yet, we can also see it's sort of proven that the risk for a catastrophic event was extremely high in these places. And if the insurance companies can't increase their premiums to cover that risk, their response was basically, okay, fine, we'll just leave the market. So there also has to be a mechanism within government to allow for some flexibility there. And, I think the issue because if you kind of compare it, as we often do, to smaller countries, I think if you were in a higher trust situation, that would be possible. My wife is from New Zealand. We often do some sort of speculative work there, and we talk to people there. The way that we approach insurance and we approach permitting and we approach basically anything that has to do with sort of public development is much easier because people have a higher level of trust and they're more willing to engage you on a sort of one-to-one level. Nowadays, I suspect a lot of the insurance is also dictated by sort of algorithms that are extremely opaque. And so whoever you're talking to on the phone probably has no idea how the policy is being underwritten in the first place. So again, insurance is going to be a big deal as risk increases. Regardless if it's fire or earthquake or flood, there's always going to be some possibility of a catastrophic event in California due to the weather. But I think this is something that probably these companies are going to have to work with policymakers to make sure things are feasible and balanced.
Yeah, it's like we can already think about the complication and the multiple layers that's involved in city making, and just building one building takes us so many years. Like think about building the entire town together. How about the community? Like how would that process even work? Like what's their role now? Like who's coming back and who's not? Like who is the community?
Yeah, I don't speak for the community at all. I mean, I've been to Malibu a few times, but I think that's another complication. Look, we're dealing with basically what I suspect to be like homeowner association politics at a city level, and making these types of decisions across however 20,000 homes is going to be really difficult, especially when everyone has a different sort of horse in the race. So I think that's also quite challenging. And I think this is, to be honest, this is something that where leadership is really necessary. And I know we said we don't want to be very political, but I would say we're experiencing right now, in a moment of intense complexity, as you have established,
Hmm.
a lack of leadership, to be honest. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you need strong people. It doesn't have to be a certain type of person, but somebody who is capable, who is aware, who's humble, who's able to listen. And to be honest, it's really tough because I don't think anybody who's going to leadership is going to get very many wins. It's not something
Hmm.
you do for fun, basically. But I don't know what that leadership looks like, but uh, I think in these types of moments, you really do need somebody who can do the job.
Right.
And again, not to place any blame, but I think that this is becoming clearer and clearer in California as I've been living here. Whether it's about public safety, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about planning, affordability. You just need somebody who can actually get the job done and do the right thing.
Speaking of leadership, well, it's Trump administration's inauguration this week, happening probably right at at the time that we're speaking. Any opinions there? Shouldn't this be like the priority on the top list of things to do for the new presidency?
Look, I mean, one fear is that this becomes a political issue, and you have extremely blue California that's experiencing these issues, and a red government will say, well, that's your problem. You deal with it. You didn't vote for me. Why should I help you? I mean, that's a lot of people's fears, and we've seen a little bit from this administration in the past. I think that's a little bit kleptocratic, and I don't think that's what we want America to be. But that being said, a lot of this has an effect in politics too, and I'm not going to speak too much about the upcoming administration. We'll see what happens, but we've already talked about in the past the effect of tariffs on the building market in America. I think just basically, let's just say this is just going to make things more expensive,
Right.
and if things are more expensive, it's just going to get more difficult.
Yeah, but then we talked about probably impossible from top down, but what about the bottom up approach? Like, can there be some shared responsibilities between the owners and maybe some professional developers who also share, the goal of rebuilding a community, not just making profit, can join and share forces? And even this, it's a great opportunity for the city too. So realign and try to make the process as easy as possible with a clear goal to build a better resistant community.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I would ask you, like, what do you think needs to happen in order to start that process? Because we
Well,
also know it's
yeah,
quite complicated.
it is quite complicated, but it is doable. And it may be easier because there is no context anymore. I mean, with joint ventures, I mean, not joint ventures, but just joining forces from the owners and initiating change and demanding change might start the ball rolling. Like if there is, and even architects too, I think they can contribute in joining forces to envision what it is. And not, I mean, it shouldn't be about any ego or any, you know, achievement of form or anything like that, but just like purely about reviving the community and just listening and planning and redesigning. Developers can also join, create a consortium to do that with a focus on just equitable development
Well, I think
with the
what you're
help of the
saying,
city too.
yeah, what you're saying is basically there's an opportunity for urban design. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the silver lining, which is, yeah, there's a real clear mission in front of these communities to rebuild better. And I hope that that's something that people can rally around, and we've seen rebirth happen in this country before. I don't think we've seen destruction at this scale in this sort of prominent location. America is very fortunate. It's never really been affected physically by war. But, if we talk about like downtown Manhattan after 9/11, we talk about New Orleans after Katrina, we talk about even a more slow decay like deindustrialization in Detroit and
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland and the effort to sort of bring those places back. If we talk about like downtown Manhattan after 9/11, we talk about New Orleans after Katrina, we talk about even a more slow decay like deindustrialization in Detroit and
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland and the effort to sort of bring those places back. There are definitely hopeful examples in the past, but I do think that again, this is why where leadership is important. You need somebody who has the right attitude, or some people, a group of people who have the right attitude, who have the right can do, and also whose incentive is basically aligned with the core mission, which is to rebuild. Not somebody who wants to, not someone who wants to benefit politically or economically.
Yeah, leverage the opportunity. I mean, it really I do understand the motivation, but like, how can I've read developers like calling those owners and like trying to buy those lands. Like, it's too soon, man. It's not good. Like,
There's always going to be that, right? Like, and that's what they do. I mean, there's that type of developer who does that 24/7. You know,
man.
it's sales basically. It's trying to make the deal, and so yeah. I mean,
Well,
when a hammer sees a nail, it's
yeah,
gonna
maybe
hammer it in.
someone needs it. So maybe that's the maybe some would find it helpful. So maybe I'm
Well,
just
yeah.
being
I mean,
too, yeah.
and there's going to be a large group of uninsured or
Right.
people who need the money basically, and probably are not going to move back. So distressed basically
Yep.
individuals. So
Yep.
I mean,
Distressed.
you can't in a system like this. This is my approach. I don't think you can blame people for asking,
That's true.
and it's up to everybody has their own agency. If they don't want to accept it, they won't accept it. Fine, but yeah, there are going to be those types of actors, no doubt. But I think that's
Well,
incumbent in any situation.
yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the questions moving forward is, how do we account for a shifting environment? How do we account for something that, regardless of climate change, it's just a more like complicated world we live in. I mean, there's more people on the earth. There's more pressure. There's more just strain on the system right now.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, it's in the case of a wildfire, it's about infrastructural management. It's about managing the doing what they call controlled burns and things like that. So it is a lot about sort of policy and governance and execution. But I also think that there are questions that arise that maybe stimulate, a little bit more sort of thought more consecutively instead of having a cataclysmic event and then we have to say, okay, how do we rebuild?
Yeah.
So I am curious basically to see what the larger ripple effects are on how we treat the built environment and how we get things done moving forward. Um, I could imagine that this is going to have effect on other jurisdictions. I mean, in Northern California, where I am right now, I'm sure people are thinking about this when it comes to other sort of challenges and issues. But I also wonder maybe on the East Coast or in the South or in the Northwest, what does that mean for people there too? Because these images are so salient.
Well, for the East, I think the perfect example would be how passive house is treated. So in Boston specifically, basically for new construction, it is a mandatory to reach the passive house design standards. It doesn't have to be certified, but the detailing needs to be there, meaning uh, airtight design, no cavities, using better windows, triple pane windows, and that alone will also help for the wildfire situation too. So maybe if the East has the benefit of energy savings and the efficient heating and cooling, the West might also benefit from preventing wildfires, with the case that we saw that survived this catastrophe.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think it goes back to the original idea about building culture. Like, how do you build? I do think, and we've talked to people in the past before. We've talked to Liz Hover, we've talked to Sam Naylor about how policy can influence that sort of building culture. I do think that this is maybe something that will accelerate that a little bit more. That's my hope.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, and I think it is time to, rethink about that rhetoric of, things are being too costly. Like, going back to the basic materials that we talked about, building with stick was the cheapest and still remains the most economical way of building for sure. But regardless, we're seeing massive housing price increases. Like, how does that equate? I think it is also just part of the excuse and rhetoric that the past generation used, by trying to force the cost as low to the lowest possible where the technology advances. And I do think the market will need to change in order for the producers to change their mind. And part of that is, like Boston, making the mandatory for a certain energy performance level, which is passive house. I mean, will move the needle, because there are firms, that I work with, and when we look at the prices, it's not that much of a difference. It's like 5 to 10%. I mean, it can make a difference, but that 5 to 10% can also be saved in other areas. Like, you can try to, if the process or the permitting process can be more efficient, that's really not much money, and it can be even cheaper than standard construction. Like, if everything else can be more efficient, so it's not
Yeah.
just about the construction cost. Like, there
Yeah,
are
but
ways to maintain that.
what about labor? I find that when I look at the
Well,
budgets,
labor, it
I'm
will
always
require,
suspicious
yeah, it
of.
will require education. And probably because I work with the firms who have enough experience delivering those type of buildings, I think the education, if that part may be, it could be, there could be some state or federal level support on that to educate builders um, to build more of those high performance buildings. Because, like, if you're a company, if you haven't built a passive house before, of course you're going to increase and pad your budget so that you have some space when you fail. But if that can be, at least part of it can be offloaded by, the city or the government to, educate the contractors or educate their subs, um, and also create a standard for the passive house, maybe wall sections or things like that. I think that labor cost question can also be alleviated.
Yeah, I mean, I think this raises an interesting point, which is because of the speed at which we can construct, which is not fast, just inherently, and because of the lack of the ability to sort of undo and redo,
Mm-hmm.
um, it really does behoove cities and communities to invest in their buildings. I think you can only do it once, basically, and so it's not like a kitchen renovation where even some people can renovate their kitchen every few years because styles change. A building's going to last for a long time. And if you look at the cities that I think have the best urban environments, they're the ones that have really sort of thought way ahead, way back when, and
Mm-hmm.
have invested in that. And, whether it's on an aesthetic level or whether it's on a building materials or technology level, the ones that have really sort of planned ahead well are the ones that will do better in the future.
I don't know how the design could play in these discussions, but I don't think it needs to be too much of a stylistic decision about what the community will need to look like. I think maybe at this time, the aesthetics can set a backseat maybe, and it can be discussed later on. But of course, that will be also a huge question, right? What will the new town look like? Like, can there be any standards because everything is gone?
Well, I think that's a good important point too, which is um, architects are not really usually dealing with life and death until they
Mm-hmm.
are. And, at the end of the day, the way your building looks is not really going to affect public safety. But the way that your building is constructed, the materials that it's made out of, its assembly process, that will. And I do think it gives sort of a little bit of clarity on the critical path that is required to actually deliver a building. And maybe a little bit of focus for architects in terms of what they should be thinking about and
Yeah.
prioritizing. Um,
Well, if you ask me, I I would propose something radical in terms of not touching the aesthetics at all and just prioritizing the speed of permitting and the speed of construction and its economic and community impact, and try to tackle the affordability in terms of structuring a kind of a specific fund dedicated for building more affordable housing in that area so that it can be more mixed. Just a thought.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think, look, the, if we want to wrap up our discussion soon, I think what we have in front of us is a huge challenge, of course, but I think it also throws into question a lot of the existing customs and habits that we have created in terms of how, at least in places like Los Angeles, our built environment is formed. And so I do think that it's will become this balancing act. What do you prioritize? Speed over quality, efficiency, energy wise over cost, density over luxury. I don't know what it is, but there's always these two sides of these coins. And I think we're going to be looking at a lot of those and starting to think, well, what do we as a society care about the most? And I think that's always going to be a hard question when more people are involved. But no, it is a startling, I think, beginning to the new year. I think that's also another reason why it's so kind of salient is that this is 2025 and this thing happens right away. But look, I mean, you and I, we try to be optimistic. We try to be positive. There's nothing. I mean, I think the tragedy is real, but I think the opportunity also is clear. And again, it's an opportunity to do better, not necessarily to make money or to win accolades or anything like that. So, but I do think it was important for us to address this and to talk about what these ideas are. And I think that's a discussion that should continue on, not just in sort of formalized media, in print and things like that, but also in conversations like we're having right now amongst friends.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. I think for sure there will be ideas like drawings and whatever form or media that will start to appear in in the platforms. Like there will be universities that will do studios on these sites and rethink what it can be. I'm excited to also see those and think about the future of this place.
Indeed. Well, on that note, I mean, thanks, Minkoo, for joining me for this conversation. I think there's a lot still to come. The fires are still going in a lot of places. So just hoping for the best, but also hoping for a better future.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern. 모스트 포던 팟캐스트